Hello and welcome to What Now with Anna and Eric. We have been reading the Bible chronologically in a year.
That's what we've been reading.
Started in January. We're still going. At one point, Eric and I had to talk about, hey, if you need to go and do other things, that's okay. And Eric replied to me, I have been in this for how many weeks now? I am not bouncing out now.
Yeah, no way. Listen,
Like, we're
I'm
more than
committed.
halfway. At this
I'm
point, it would be
committed.
pointless to stop.
I ain't
So
stopping till Revelation.
that's right.
I
That's
gotta
right.
see how this plays out.
So if you've made it this far in the Bible, hey, most of your motivation is just not wasting 3/4 of your year.
Yeah,
Like, I'm already this far into it. There's no
yeah.
point.
And I mean, we built up to Jesus, and now we're getting all the Jesus we can handle. So if you're like, well, what's after Jesus? We get to see how his main guys live without him. How do they press on? There's a lot of stuff
There's a
that's
lot.
going on after this. So don't bail out now.
Yeah.
And we haven't even gotten to dragons and horses and
yeah.
all that
The
stuff.
apocalypse.
Yeah. So I mean,
Very exciting.
if you're into that, hang on.
Look forward to the end of the universe. It's a coming.
Happy Thoughts by Anna Mae Martin.
Happy thoughts, yes. We're so excited to talk to you today. If you are not reading the Bible chronologically, that's okay. You can still read the Bible.
Yeah.
And so we're going to be talking about some Bible concepts. We've been in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, looking at the life of Jesus. We found that he has a lot of good things to say, and we never are able to hit on all of our notes. So we're just going to kind of work within our time frame, basically.
I do have to say, if you are like, if this is your first time reading the Bible, or you're just checking this out and you're like, I don't know, I think I might want to read the Bible, I would read the Gospels separately. This is kind of weird. I don't know. I'm getting a weird feeling of reading them all together. Like,
It is very interesting.
I like sitting in one perspective and then going to another perspective and reading that through that lens. It's tough when you're like in the same day reading the same thing from different perspectives. It's kind of,
I like it.
it's not bad.
No.
It's just different. It's different.
It is different. Yeah.
That's what I've learned from this chronological reading plan, is that it's different.
It is interesting because I read Luke right before this week because I was finishing a separate Read the Bible plan. And so as we're going through this, I'm recognizing what parts of it are Luke, because I'm like, wait, didn't I just hear that before? And I'm like, oh, I read it from my other Bible plan. But it is interesting to see the differences. But I would say, I would agree with you in that if this is your first time reading the Bible, we always recommend start with John.
Yep. It's just an easy go-to.
It's an easy go-to.
Easy
just
read.
Whatever.
Easy
just
read.
read John.
Yeah.
Or if you've been in the Bible for a while and have never completed a gospel or Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John, read John. I would definitely recommend that. Because
so basically, if you're out there, just read John. Go for it.
If you're alive, breathing right now, read the book of John if you've never done it.
Go for it.
It's just good stuff. It's got, my friend Jesus. He's just the man, the myth, the legend.
The man, the myth, the legend.
Although he's not a man of myth, but he is pretty legendary.
He is a legend.
Yeah.
He's full man, full man, full God.
He's not really man anymore, though, right?
Truth. So. You know what's funny is this week, though, I just put it out on a piece of paper that I stick in my Bible of like what we're reading. And it's like got Matthew 9, 10, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. It's got all the week. And then Luke, 9. Just 9. I'm like, Luke kind of got the short end of the stick this week, but it's all right.
It was kind of, and it really shows you that they really did have different focuses.
Yeah.
When they
Luke checked out during this part.
Yeah.
He was like, eh.
Like at the beginning, we looked at Jesus' birth. John basically said nothing. It was all the other guys. And now we're in this separate
People prioritize different things.
Yes.
So
Okay, so
right.
I have 3 central points that I landed on.
Boom. Father, Son, Holy Ghost. Got
Yes.
it.
The 3 facets of God. And they kind of hit on, actually, pretty close to what Eric was talking about. I had some verses that hit on, I don't want to say personality, but kind of like the nature of God. I had some verses that reflected what people expected of God. And then I just had a random breakdown of a scene that Jesus was in that somebody actually asked me about. So I'm like, oh, now I got to talk about it. So
There we go. Love it. All right, let's dive in.
So let's dive in. Okay, so I started with what I thought was very interesting. Matthew chapter 10 and John chapter 6 had very similar moments theme-wise. So Matthew 10:34 says, this is Jesus speaking. Don't imagine that I came to bring peace to the earth. Shocking moment. I came not to bring peace, but a sword. And then Jesus goes on to say, he says, fathers going to turn against their children, children are going to turn against their fathers, brothers are going to turn against their sisters. Now, if you know what's going to happen historically, you realize in this passage that basically after Jesus' resurrection, there's this explosion of persecution in the church. And like parents were literally turning in their kids were turning in their parents, siblings were turning in their siblings, and these people were being taken in by the government and being imprisoned and slaughtered. So this is about to happen. But people's perception of the Messiah has been, since the Old Testament, because we got to go through the Old Testament, that basically they were expecting God to come in and bring peace and to free them from this government. And in fact, we see that again in John 6:14-15. It says, when the people saw him, Jesus, do this miraculous sign, they exclaimed, surely he's the prophet we have been expecting. And when Jesus saw that they were ready to force him to be their king, he slipped away into the hills by himself. So what I really got from, and these were 2 separate verses, but what I was really thinking in the moment was, what kind of God are people looking for? And I was like, this doesn't just apply to them, it so much applies to us too. Because sometimes we get into Christianity and we are looking for a God that is going to bring us peace and happiness and prosperity and only that, like nothing else. Not to say that God doesn't give you joy. He does. You will never find any greater joy than God. He can give you prosperity. There are so many verses about God not only giving you what you need, but also sometimes what you want, if it's good for you. But he's also a God that is not just that. So I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah, and I just think it's one of those things that you look at it, and what's so fun, I love that we're gonna force him to be our king. Like you rule us. Like, please rule us. But I think it's what God are you looking for? And I think that's a lot of things. Is like we go into our relationship with God and say, yes, God, I want you to work in these parts of my life. Yep, this is what I want you to do. Oh no, not that part. No, this is mine. I've got this, but I need you in this. And it's like that giving it fully over to God to say, I'm going to trust in you and I'm going to be open and honest where I'm at, because I love that Matthew 10. It's like he's going to send them out. And it's not like Jesus says, and here is all the stuff that you're going to take with you to go do this. I'm going to give you resources and I'm going to give you provisions. He's like, nope, don't take anything and go. And then be with these people. Oh, and by the way, there's gonna be persecution and people are gonna be against you, and it's not gonna be this.
It's not gonna be pretty.
And it's like, wow, you could have, like, man, it would have been nice if you would have given us all the great things to go do this stuff, and then told us how great it was gonna be when we go do it. But it's not like that, and I just thought that was a really cool part that I wrote down was, yeah, I'm going to send you out. And by the way, it's not going to be easy. And I'm not going to really give you anything besides the message that I've given you to go share with other people and go.
Yeah. I think and I'm just now realizing this, what is very ironic about this passage, specifically when they're going to force him to be king, and spoiler alert, this is a spoiler alert. When Jesus is crucified, they take a crown of thorns, stick it on his head, and put a sign above it that says King of the Jews. When Jesus didn't even want to be King of the Jews, but that's what they accused him of. Yeah. And they made fun of him for it while he was dying. And I'm just like, oh, come on. Or like, right before this.
We always talk about humanizing God. We always want to humanize it. So they needed him to be in what they, and I think we do it too, what we expect God to be. Like, that's a Messiah's coming. He's gonna rule over us. So we need you to be king. We need you to sit on a throne in front of us and rule us. And he's like, no, you're not getting it.
And everybody had a very specific expectation of what they thought the Messiah would be. There's so many different times in here when the Pharisees are like, he can't be the Messiah. The prophet never came from Galilee. They specifically say that at one point. Or he can't be the Messiah because he's doing this. Or there's this moment where they're asking him for a miracle. They're like, prove it to us by doing a miracle, even though he's been healing people this whole time.
Yeah.
But they have such a specific role for God in their minds. They cannot see him for what he truly is, which totally speaks, again, to exactly what you were saying. We do that. We have a very specific role for God.
And to go along with it, and I wrote it on here, is the Matthew 13:53, when he goes back to his hometown, when he's in there and they're like, nah, he can't be doing, like, no way is it. But they can't, because you got to figure he grew up in that town. Like, they saw him running around, playing, doing whatever he did. Like, and now those people couldn't get past Jesus's past and see through that. And like, how, I think that's where kind of we're at is, well, I can't be a Christian, or I can't fully dive into this relationship because of who I was. And it's such a perfect thing to say, you know what? You can't hold on to people's perception of you. You really have to lean into God's calling in it. And that's what Jesus did. He's like, okay, these people, a prophet is not without honor except in his home, in his own
hometown,
and his own home. Like, it's one of those things that Jesus is like, listen, I was put here to do this. God called me to do this. This is what I need to do. And in my hometown, they can't even get past who I was before God's timing for me to step into this. They can't look past that and see who I really am. Yeah. So I kind of went with it. So, all right, that's number one.
Yep, number one. Number two was what I want to say are emotional aspects of God. We often think of him as, because he's God, he's totally different from us in so many ways. We don't even necessarily think of him as emotional, even though throughout the Bible, he's angry a lot, he's sad a lot, and sometimes he's joyful. Because, man, we screwed up so much. It was mostly anger that was referenced in the Old Testament.
There was a lot of
anger.
And then death.
Yeah. But there were just some moments that really struck me in this specific point of our reading. Now, there are other moments in the passages, some we haven't got to, that I'm sure we'll hit on, where Jesus is clearly, we talked about his compassion last week. Wow, he saw somebody in need and then he was moved, But one of them is in not a direct reference. It's John 6:64. These are actually in the same section. Jesus says to the people around him, but some of you do not believe me. For Jesus knew from the beginning which ones didn't believe, and he knew who would betray him. And I always thought this was interesting when I first read it, because I was like, if Jesus knew Judas was going to screw him over, why did he include him in his 12 disciples? Well, something that really struck me, this was actually a number of years ago, is I was like, this is straight up, because I often think about what Satan is thinking in these points of view, because Satan does a lot of things where it says in the Bible, Satan specifically did this because he knew it would tick off God, or like he knew it would do this, or he would often pinpoint the Jewish people for persecution because they were God's chosen people. Like he would do stuff like that. I even think if you look historically at like World War II, should we be surprised that the Jews specifically were persecuted? Probably not. I mean, I think it's become clear that Satan likes to throw stuff in God's face just because. And so I'm reading this and I'm thinking about, okay, Jesus has this friend, right? Spends time with, who ultimately betrays him. And I was like, who does that remind me of? It reminds me of Satan himself, who was like in a high position in heaven, was probably close to God, and then betrayed God and threw it in his face. And I'm looking at this and I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, this is Satan telling Jesus, hey, another good friend of yours is going to screw you over. How do you feel now? And I was like, holy crap.
Well, I always, anytime, I don't know why it's not always in my mind, but it always sparks in those things like, how awkward is that dynamic in the room? Like,
With
it's
Judas.
gotta be so weird, because it's not like Judas just at one point said, you know what? I'm going to do this one. Like he's in
He's
charge
probably
of
pretty shifty.
working through it. He's probably doing some shady stuff,
Yeah.
like throughout. And Jesus knows all of this, and yet he's still there's still grace with it. Like, no, yeah, keep holding on to the money. No, keep doing this. No, keep hanging out. Oh yeah, I'll let you. And it's just over and over. And he even knows what's going to happen. And I think it speaks so much to grace and compassion of Jesus. But man, I can only, like, once again,
And the other disciples have no idea.
Yeah, nothing. And
They don't
like,
know.
gotta side eye him once in a while, just like,
Yeah.
what do you, like, oh, Judas.
I was thinking about when Jesus is like, pair off and go to villages and heal people. And I'm like, wait, there's 12 of them. One of them is with Judas. Like,
Well,
who got the short straw?
and you think Jesus, like, that's a commentary. Like, do you think he partnered like one of the strongest?
Yeah, like in faith with Judas, like, I know this guy will not be swayed.
Yeah, maybe this, or did he pick the one that he like didn't like the most? He's like, oh, yep, you go with Judas.
I was like, that was my first thought when I read that. I was like, one of them is with Judas.
There has to be a commentary or an article out there about who he paired off.
Which disciple got Judas? It's pretty funny.
Yeah. Oh, things we talk about.
Yeah, things we talk about. Okay.
All right.
The second emotional point, it's in the same section. It's just verse 66 to 67. And it says, so Jesus is talking about if basically his sacrifice, but he's talking about it in terms of, you're going to have to eat my flesh, and everybody's really freaked out about it. And it says in 6:66 through 67, at this point, many of his disciples turned away and deserted him. Then Jesus turned to the 12 and asked, are you also going to leave? Or in a different passage, are you going to leave me too? Yeah. And I had read this before, but there was at one point where I read this and I was like heartbroken in this moment, because I'm just thinking about, even now, God is looking down at people and he's saying, man, are you going to leave me too? Like, is that what it's going to come down to? Are you also going to desert me? And I was like, ah!
Well, and that's like, so like with students tonight, we have our Bible study and we're answering questions that students have. And one of the question we're asking tonight, or answering tonight and discussing tonight, is, why do bad things happen to good people? Or why does God let bad things happen to good people. And it's that love of free will and the ability to make decisions. Like right now, Jesus is looking at them and saying, I want you to follow me. I know where this is going. You are going to carry this message. But if you guys leave, I'm not going to stop you from leaving. Like you're not trapped here. I'm not making you be here. You have the choice. And he right there in that question is, do you not want to leave too? Like, are you going? And they could have all said, yeah, we're out. Yeah, you know what? You're right.
This is when Judas took us out.
Yeah. But that's the thing. And it's not like Jesus is going to beg or he's going to say, no, you have to, or we have a contract, so you need to stay here. Anybody can step out of this relationship at any time. And that's why I think Peter's answer to it right afterwards is so important, because it says, Lord, to whom shall we go? Like, listen,
Yeah.
I believe you are who you say you are. And if I believe that, where else am I going? Like there's no other option. Like,
Yeah.
and once you make that decision to follow Jesus, if you dive in with every part of your being, yeah, where else are you going to go? Like you might make mistakes, you might screw up, and keep coming back to him because there's nowhere else to go. And he's going to continue to welcome you back and move forward with it. But yeah, I just think that answer that's the part that I highlighted, is that question, but also, yeah, where else? Like there isn't. Once you know God's love and once you experience that transformation that Jesus gives you, I don't know where else you go. I don't know what else you do with that. So
true. Very true. Very true.
Mhm.
Okay. This is my last one.
All right.
And I actually was not originally going to talk about this, but somebody came up to me on Sunday and asked me specifically about this passage because they're also reading through the plan. And so at the time, I hadn't really looked into it. I wasn't planning on talking about it. But I was like, well, now I gotta. And it was actually really fun. So it's this weird moment in the story, and it's in several of the Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John's.
Which one are you pulling from?
I'm pulling from Mark chapter 7.
You would. You're so a Mark person.
Wow.
You're such a Mark.
So in this passage, Jesus is traveling with his disciples. A Gentile woman comes up to him and says, hey, my child is demon possessed. Can you cast it out? And Jesus is like, listen, I'm not here for you. I'm here for the Jews. So yeah. And then the woman's like, well, okay, but I mean, well, he makes this reference. He basically calls her a dog. And she's like, even dogs eat the scraps from their master's table. And Jesus is like, okay, cool, yeah. Then he casts out the demon. Now, the question from this person was, this is a very strange section of scripture. Like, it feels like Jesus, who's this really kind person who really only chews out the Pharisees, is being super mean to this woman who just wants a demon cast out of her son. And he's like, what? How am I supposed to possibly interpret this? And so we had kind of talked it through, but then I looked into it more as I was preparing for this. And so there are several things that we need to keep in mind when we're interpreting this passage of scripture. One of the things that I did tell the person who asked me is I said, I always have in the back of my mind, what is the consistent nature of God? So if Jesus is consistently loving sinners, consistently bringing people mercy and truth, then I need to think in the context of this passage, that is what is happening. Doesn't sound like it's what is happening, but that is what is happening. So that's the first thing I always do when I look at scripture. What does the bigger picture tell me? Mm-hmm. Now, I looked into this in a number of ways, and I do want to tell people, if you are looking at a passage of the Bible and you're just not sure what it means, look on the internet. I mean,
you can look and you can find
wealth of information.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
there's commentaries, there's people's opinions. Like
Yeah.
you have to,
There's prayer.
yeah. And so you have to be wise with what you and don't just
Take
like,
the first thing.
yeah, but really do some research. And then I think a lot of it is you have to establish your heart and your feeling behind the scripture. You can hear everybody, but don't read one opinion and go, yep, that's my opinion. I have that same opinion. Take it all in and then develop an opinion of your own.
Yeah.
Come to it.
Especially if it's a hot topic,
Yeah.
I would recommend looking very closely at both sides of the issue, even if you're leaning towards one or the other.
Yeah. Sure.
And then again, pray, because hey, if anybody knew what Jesus meant when he said something, it's Jesus.
Yeah.
Like he knows. So in this specific passage, here's a couple of things that are happening. So Jesus says several times he came first to the Jews and then to the Gentiles. That is one specific thing he says to hers. He says, first, it's for the Jews. He didn't say it's not for you. He said it's not for you yet, is what this is a reference to. And we see later that after Jesus' resurrection, there's a number of the apostles are ministering to the Jews, and then specifically Paul goes out and it spreads throughout the world. And a big part of what Jesus did with his death and resurrection was he made salvation available to everybody, not just the Jews.
Yeah.
So that's one of those bigger picture things you have to keep in mind when you're reading this. Now, there are also subtle nuances to this, which was interesting to see in the research. So at one point, Jesus references her as a dog, but several of the things that I looked at said, if you specifically look at the language, he says little dog, which is basically a softening of what he's saying to her. Is he's basically saying, like, you're not like the rabid mongrels wandering the streets, which is what most people insulted Gentiles with. He was basically saying, like, you're a pet. So it's like a huge step up, basically. And so he actually used some softening language when he was talking to her, which we don't get when we read it straight up. But if you look at the actual original text, then you can kind of see that. But mostly what gives us an idea of what's happening in this passage is literature, the context of the literature. So something that we always say on here is if you're going to read something, you want to understand it, read what happened before, read what happened after, to really get what is occurring in this moment. And so there's a passage, Mark chapter 7, and it's 18 to 19. And it happens right before this moment. So Jesus has just fed a bunch of people, and then the disciples are getting this whole discussion about food, and Jesus says in 7, 18 and 19, don't you understand either, he asked. Can't you see that the food you put into your body cannot defile you? Food doesn't go into your heart, but only passes through the stomach and then goes into the sewer. By saying this, he declared that every kind of food is acceptable in God's eyes. This is a very big deal because in the Jewish laws, you were only allowed specific foods. Everything else was considered unclean. Now, here's the combination passage. As Jesus says this, the disciples, he's saying, you don't get it. They go into Gentile territory to some unclean people, some people that, as the Jewish people thought, hey, you can't eat specific foods, they also thought these specific people are never going to be saved because they're not the righteous people of Israel. And then in this context, Jesus has a conversation with the woman. And I actually had kind of mentioned this when the person asked the question. I said, well, I do wonder who was in the audience when he was having this conversation. The person who was in the audience was his disciples that had just misunderstood the food reference, that some is clean and some is unclean according to their perspectives, but God is saying all of it is clean. And then he has this conversation with a woman that basically references Jews and Gentiles. And he's like, oh, it's not for you right now. And she said, but God, like, even the Gentiles or even the dogs give the scraps to their master. And Jesus says, you are right. And then he casts out the demon. And it is, when you look at this context, it appears so clear that Jesus is making a point to the people who are with him. But you don't necessarily get that if you just read this context by itself.
And I think you look at it and it's a very trust the process and trust God's timing in this, but also understand the power that God has, because you look at it and Jesus had a specific purpose. Like, yes, he is going to die, he's going to be resurrected, and then it's going to spread throughout the world. But right now, he is ministering to a specific people group. He is trying to get a specific people group to understand that. And he's trying to work with these 12 people to get them to really understand it so they can go off and do bigger things. So when this, which is out of its lane a little bit, it's that moment, he makes it a point to talk through it, but ultimately he does do the thing. He does show, he's like, yeah, I can do this, but this isn't what I was supposed to, like, this is where we're at. This is what we're trying to do. But don't worry, salvation's coming to everyone, and I can provide that. But also, man, when Paul comes on the scene, like when Peter really starts going out, like that's the time where God's plan to reach those people really happens. And it's because Jesus sets the table for it here that's allowed to happen the way, or that happens the way it's going to happen. Because it wasn't like I'm sending Jesus and Jesus is going to go all over the world to spread this to all the people. No, he's equipping people to then go reach other people. And that's what I think we look at that, and we have to understand that, man, we have to, maybe we only have a small people group. Maybe we only have this small thing. We don't need to change a whole community right off the bat, or we don't need to step into this, because we have to trust God's plan and what God has given us to do right now. And don't be afraid to step out of that lane a little bit and still do some pretty good work outside of it. So, yeah. But yeah.
I do want to say too, don't forget that Eric and I are not Jesus. So if we say something, you're like, that's not right, go pray about it. Look at it for yourself.
Listen, maybe you think it's okay to call people dogs. I don't know.
I don't personally, but
not. But yeah. Listen, like I always say, my theology might be skewed. My statements might be skewed. Find out for yourself. Develop your own.
And we have so much at our fingertips too. I think I really do want to say that, is that you don't have to be a Bible scholar to, I want to say correctly, but wisely interpret the Bible. I mean, if nothing else, the internet, while it brings with it many evils, everything does. I mean, evil's always existed. We also have great resources. We have theologians, people with master's degree in theology at our fingertips, who have written articles and they've taught sermons and they have commentaries. And as we are right now, it is way easier for us to wisely interpret the Bible for ourselves than it was even historically. I mean, if you look at the church back in the day, where it was in one language and only the Catholic priest could read it out loud, and interpretation was solely within their hands, we're not living in that world anymore. And the Bible is more accessible to us as a common man than it has ever been in the history of the world. So I want to encourage people, and I want to say, what?
Or a common woman.
Or common woman. Okay, fine. Man, I was using man as like a mankind.
Anna wants the Bible only accessible to men, but I feel that women should be able to access it as well. She still makes me read it to her every day. She calls me and makes me read her.
Can you please? Okay, we're on day 232.
I am not allowed to open this book.
So anyways, okay, let's do next steps quickly.
Awesome.
Mine is based off of my first point. What
role? Hang on.
What? Oh, do you want to go first?
can we really take a minute to just mourn the passing of John the Baptist this past week?
That did happen. He died
Once
like
again,
right away.
second
I
favorite.
thought of you. I
in
was
the-
like, Eric's second favorite Bible character is dead.
Yeah, he gone.
He
And
gone.
so, but yeah, so we just didn't. We
He
didn't.
did get referenced. Jesus talked about him recently. He was
I
like,
know.
Elijah already came. You killed him. Thanks
So,
for that.
but yeah, so now we can go into next steps. But I just wanted to let's
Let's just take a
take a
moment of
moment.
silence.
we'll just-
Okay.
There you
Next
go.
up.
John the Baptist. It's a good guy. Good guy. Did some things.
Yes, that's a great
All
thing.
right. Next steps.
My next step.
Yeah.
What role have you placed God in your life? So what kind of God are you looking for? And are you letting him be anything else? Because God is everything. So I think it's more of a self-check kind of next step.
Mine is a self-evaluation too.
Of course it is.
You know me. I'm all about, but mine is really
Prepare your hearts.
letting things go. Letting things go. That's what I think your next step should be. Letting things go.
It will never die.
But I really think, what parts of your life are you not letting God in? Like you're asking God to work in these moments. You're having that, but are you really letting him into every aspect of your life? And are you inviting him in? Or are you still in that relationship with God that you feel you have the ability to hide things away from him? Or are you fully giving yourself over? Because if you can get to that point where Peter says, where else am I going to go? Like where else are you going with parts of your life? That's the thing. Where are you taking it to if you're not taking it to God? And where is it being accepted or not looked at or hidden away? So I think that's what parts of your life do you need to open up to God? So
Yeah.
that's it.
Jesus.
He's still doing great things.
He's still doing great things.
You know what's funny is I just realized that, and out of all of that scripture, we did not even have a quick discussion on the fact that Jesus walks on water. Yeah.
I knew it. That was one of the ones where I made a brief note, which really just had to do with all the different versions of that event.
I just think it's so funny. There's so much going on that Jesus legitimately walks on water and has this encounter where really the only other person takes a couple steps on the water.
And did you realize only one of the three versions of that story talked about Peter getting on the water?
Yeah.
And I'm like, the other people were like, his effort was so pitiful, I don't even want to mention it.
Yeah.
That was what I thought in my mind.
It wasn't great.
Yeah, it wasn't great. Just don't even, I mean, it happened. Don't even put that in there. Don't write it down.
Yeah. I just think there's so much in there that it was just funny that, John the Baptist, got rid of him. Who cares? We're not going to talk about it. Walking on water, whatever.
Instead, let's talk about this moment where Jesus calls somebody a dog.
Yeah. Let's really discuss.
Let's dive into that.
Yeah. But hey, and who paired up with Judas?
Who got stuck with him on the mission trips?
Show up to What Now with Ann and Eric for the heavy hitting.
Yes, exactly.
Bible, not those little fluffy walk on water stuff. We're figuring out how Jesus and Judas interacted throughout his ministry, knowing that he's going to betray him.
The Bible is so good. It's so good.
Stick with us next year when we go through it again and give you another take on it.
Yeah. Maybe by year 4, we'll hit you walk on water.
Oh, good times.
So thank you for listening to What Now with Ann and Eric talking about the Bible. We encourage you, read it for yourself. It is so good. And it's funny and it's deep and it's just all sorts of awesome.
Transformational. It's transformational.
It is. It's transformational. So we look forward to talking to you next week.
I'll be here.
Yeah. Have an awesome week.
See ya.